Welcome, everyone. My name is Andy Engel, and I'm going to be your host tonight. Welcome to Reimagine. If you can turn your cameras on, it would be great to see you. If you can't, we also understand. I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. Normally, the host of these monthly vigils is Brad Wolf. He was unable to come tonight. He asked me to step in. I'm glad to be here with all of you. I want to tell you a bit about Reimagine. For those who don't know, Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, different ages, different races, different faiths, people of no faith. We all come together at vigils like this one and other events to find solace in a world that often feels alienating, disorienting, and hopeless. We support each other to face adversity, loss, and mortality, and to transform life's biggest challenges into purpose, action, and growth. Reimagine's vigils began as a response to a need that we saw, the need for spaces to openly acknowledge and share our personal and collective grief, to create a sacred pause, to be with that pain rather than brush it over. As we come together for this vigil, it is a powerful reminder that now, more than ever, people need access to these types of experiences. So thanks to all of you who made a donation when you registered. We appreciate it. At Reimagine, we create opportunities, mostly in the digital space, where people can talk openly and freely about living and dying, about death, about loss, about grief and sorrow, but also about joy. So if you're able to share with us in the chat something in the last week that brought you some joy, even just a little bit of joy or some relief, please put that in the chat. I can tell you this morning, I went to see a wonderful exhibition in New York City, which is where I live. It was at the Whitney Museum. It's called Edges of Ailey, and it's a celebration of the choreographer and dancer Alvin Ailey. And it was such a beautiful exhibition. Paintings, video, other kinds of ephemera. And I just love dance. And it just lifted me up. So please share that in the chat, anything that brought you a little bit of joy. I want to offer you some instructions about Zoom. In case you don't know, you can click on the CC icon to get a live transcript of what's being said. And if you'd like to see a recording of the full transcript as it plays out, click on the CC icon and select the View Full Transcript option. Also, in the chat, you can save and download what people are writing in the chat by clicking on the three dots within the chat window. And feel free to send my colleagues, Trina Williams or Derek Hosberg, a note in the chat in case you're having some technical problems. They will try to help you out. So I want to go into what kind of space we're in right now all together. It is a collective space to grieve. It is a space that cultivates compassion for others and for ourselves. Most of us have arrived here with some kind of pain in our hearts, and our hope is to help people of all backgrounds and all abilities to face loss, adversity, and mortality, and to create a more compassionate world. This is a space for bravery. It takes courage to show up for others, especially people who you don't know. Most of us are strangers in this room. And it takes courage to lament and to grieve in public. There are few spaces to acknowledge and share this. And with all that's going on in the US and around the world, now more than ever, we need these gatherings to talk about illness, to talk about joy. Let's choose to respect all lives lost, regardless of religion, nationality, or ethnicity. Thank you for co-creating this space with us. Finally, this space is not perfect. We might fumble, we might falter, we might offend, but we ask for your grace. Now, this is what this space is not. It's not about blaming. It's not about imposing beliefs on others. It's not about providing solutions or fixing things. Another thing I want to emphasize is that although this is not a political space, it is a space to cultivate social justice. Our colleague Mazen Jamal has offered this definition of justice. Quote, "It's an environment of integrity and wholeness, achieved through healing and transformation. When justice is present, we can trust that our safety and well-being are valued in a community or society." This is our aspiration for tonight. So, what's going to happen tonight? The vigil is going to be around 80 minutes long. We're going to begin with a candlelighting ceremony. So if you don't have a candle or matches or a lighter, now is a good time to grab those. After lighting candles, we'll hear from our guest, Sarah LaBrie. I'll say more about her soon. Our second guest is musician Jane Rigler. You heard her flute when we entered the space, and you'll hear more from Jane. She'll lead our honor ceremony for the second half of the program. That's your opportunity to enter the names of loved ones in the chat. Then we bookend the vigil with candle extinguishing, and we'll have some announcements. Okay. And now I'd like to invite my colleagues Trina Williams, Derek Hosberg, and Amanda Nagai to lead the candle lighting ceremony. Now we will take our candles and we will light them. And after lighting the candle, you could hold that up to the camera. And then Trina will begin with the first recitation of the blessing.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
And now let's take a moment. If your Zoom settings are not in gallery view, please put them in gallery view so we can see everybody and all these delightful faces. Let's just take a moment together with our candles and with each other. Thank you. Okay, I am so looking forward to this conversation with Sarah LaBrie. My colleague Amanda Nagai at Reimagine has prepared this interview. Thank you, Amanda. Amanda wears the hat of Chief of Staff at Reimagine. when she's not helping us streamline operations and communications and helping out with strategy, she's writing poetry. Now a few words about Sarah LaBrie. She was born in the Bay Area and raised in 3rd Ward, one of Houston's most historic African-American neighborhoods. By the way, Alvin Ailey was also a Texan. No One Gets to Fall Apart is her debut memoir. These days, so many of us are attempting to navigate our anxiety and our mental health. And this is why we are so fortunate tonight to get a glimpse of Sarah's journey to make sense of herself and her family history. Sarah lives in Los Angeles, where she works as a TV writer. She was most recently a producer on the HBO and Starz television show Minx and the Starz series Blindspotting. Her opera libretti have been performed at Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA and the Apollo Theater in Harlem. No One Gets to Fall Apart was a New York Times editor's pick in 2024. Esquire described Sarah's book as best memoir of the year, and the San Francisco Chronicle called it a new book for a season of change. Please welcome Sarah and Amanda.
Thank you so much. Hi.
Hi. Am I in? Okay. Hi there. I'm so excited to be talking with you about this book. I really loved it. I mean, you're so vulnerable and raw in this book about your experiences, and you're speaking to such important things about, mental health and identity and just the griefs and trauma of history, of lineage, of present, of just so many things. It's so raw. I'm so grateful that you're sharing this story, your story with the world. And when Andy first gave me this book, I was really struck by the title, because the ending poem of my first poetry book is Fall Apart, and yours is No One Gets to Fall Apart. So this topic is so dear to my heart and what I think about. So with all of the grief that's in the world today, all the things going on around the world, and in LA, which you call home, and with all the personal losses and pains, as well as the ancestral and history lineages, the pains from all of that some of what you detail in your book. In the swirl of all of that, and that's a lot, I wanted to start by asking, who are you here for tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say I'm here for my mother. The book, No One Gets to Fall Apart, is about my mother and her diagnosis of schizophrenia and the year that followed. And her birthday was on the 3rd, so I've been thinking about her a lot. And yeah, I would say I'm here to honor her.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's so much in here about your mother and your relationship. And last fall we hosted at Reimagine this series on ambiguous grief, which explores like all the emotions, sorrow, anger, numbness, all the things that come up with non-death related losses. We had wonderful speakers, people who changed careers, with experienced infidelity, infertility, but we really didn't explore the effects of a family member's mental illness on the family. And so really just what you're bringing here with your story is just so important. And I'd like to set the stage for our audience and share some of your story with them. So would you mind beginning by reading the opening passage of your book for us?
Sure. Also, just I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me into this space. I do feel like there is kind of a lack of, I don't know, of places where it feels safe to talk about grief and its relationship to things like shame and forgetting and ambiguous grief and ambivalence. And that's definitely something that I think about a lot, but have not really, even on the press tour for this book, been asked to speak about a lot or felt comfortable speaking about, because it can make other people so uncomfortable. And it is really wonderful that you guys have built a community where we can kind of honor that discomfort and sit in it and look at it and examine it and see the worth and the value that it holds for all of us. that was
Thank you.
definitely one of my goals in writing the book. So yeah, thank you.
Well, you did a really good job in opening that conversation for a lot of folks, and thank you for that reflection.
Where do you put the gallery?
Okay, so I'm just gonna read the first couple pages. My book is called No One Gets to Fall Apart, and it is a memoir. In March 2017, my grandmother in Houston calls me in Los Angeles to tell me my mother was recently found on the side of the freeway, parked honking her horn, her car filled with notes in which she outlined federal agents' plans to kill her. In the car was a receipt for bottled water from George Bush Intercontinental Airport over an hour away. Later, we learned she spent the day there, terrified she was going to be murdered and hoping if something happened, it would be caught on a security camera. Actually, my grandmother informs me, my mother has been saying cars driven by sunglasses-wearing white men have been chasing her down the highway since February. The number started at 10, then rose to dozens, and then to hundreds. She called and wrote notes to my grandmother's friends and colleagues, to neighbors, to strangers, detailing her persecution, leading the police to appear more than once at her home. At times, my mother was so afraid she slept in her car, not going inside to shower or change. She was fired from her nursing job after she drowned her work laptop in her bathtub. She purchased cameras to take pictures of the people following her and then threw the cameras away. She took my Aunt Tina on walks through the neighborhood and pointed out all the white cars. See, she said, how they all have their lights on in the daytime. My aunt tried to tell her the lights were a feature of the cars and not an element of some conspiracy, but my mother did not believe her. She was committed to the psychiatric ward at Bayshore Medical Center, a hospital outside the city. The hospital called Aunt Tina, who called my grandmother, who tried to get her released the following morning, but was not allowed to see or speak to her. Nurses injected her with medication that put her to sleep for 48 hours. When she woke up, she called my grandmother and asked, "What happened? Who said somebody wanted to kill me?" My grandmother and Aunt Tina told her the truth, which was that nobody, aside from my mother herself, believed anyone wanted to kill her. Since coming home from the hospital, my grandmother tells me, my mother is back to normal, looking for a new nursing job. She blames the Houston traffic and the onset of menopause. She says the psychiatrist who released her diagnosed her as severely depressed. I hang up awash in guilt, open the calendar on my phone, and try to remember what I was doing for the nights that she was in the hospital and I didn't know. A friend directed a Schubert performance by the Los Angeles Philharmonic that I wanted to go to, but ultimately skipped in favor of working on the novel I'd been trying to finish for years. I was home writing and feeling bad about not going to the symphony, while my mother was in a car on the side of the highway, begging someone to save her life. I remember an odd phone conversation with her the week before last. She called to apologize for something she once said that hurt me. It was the first time we'd spoken in a while, and that phone call, combined with this new information, suggests conclusions I don't feel quite ready to accept.
Thank you, Sarah. There's so much in there, the guilt, the confusion, the denial, the pain of it all. I'm wondering, how do you relate to this concept of ambiguous grief? What feels unique about the grief you experienced with your mother compared to other kinds of grief you may have had?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. So something that I think I've realized recently is that grief and rage are deeply interconnected. And my mother, when I was growing up, was so angry. Like we had a really difficult relationship. She was abusive, and she was kind of myopic about it. I don't think she had any real sense of introspection around the way her own traumas as a child were affecting the way that she then mothered me. And I have been carrying and have carried so much anger around my childhood. And sometimes it was so hard to see outside of that. And more I'm understanding how much of that rage was actually grief for my childhood, for her inability to be a mother, even though she really wanted to be a good mother. But it's so much easier to be angry than it is to be sad, because you feel protected by your rage, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I don't know. I wonder if there was ever a point, if she had been able to realize that, if that might have changed things for her, if she had been allowed to feel sad or think about her own grief, instead of, I think for her generation and her mother's generation, so much grief was so intertwined with shame, and that you had to hide it, you couldn't talk about it. And that was passed along to me. You know, I inherited that same way of
Yeah.
thinking. Luckily, I was able to break out of it, but she never did.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that connection between grief and rage. I've seen and experienced and seen this in others a lot too, of people, sometimes rage can feel like you can stay on the surface with it, right? You don't have to really go into the depths if you're just angry. Whereas I've had friends say to me, and they explore a lot deep, difficult things in life, and then they still say to me, like, I'm afraid if I let myself cry, I'll never stop. Right. So there's that idea of like, if we sink down, if we really are in there, like what's going to be there? Can we handle it? Right. And so what you spoke to just now, and what you speak to in the book around, I guess, like denial. I don't know if that's the right word you would use, but that seemed to come up a lot of like as a family coping mechanism, which I think is very true of many of our families, you know, that, like the sense that you said for your family, like that your grandmother says in this passage that your mother is like just stressed or menopausal or depressed, right? She's not mentally ill. And then it comes up in other parts of the book too, that there's a sense that your family thinks your childhood like may have been hard, but it's not full of all the traumatic experiences that you're starting to share with them. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that happened, you know? So there's this like, you know, we'll just keep going. We'll keep going. Right. And it's not actually true. So we don't have to address it. Right. So I'm curious, like how, like you said, you were able to break out of that. And I think some of that journey is in the book, but I'm curious for our audience, and also if anything how you would think about it now, like how are you able to go from such like heavily inculcated denial to being able to publish this very raw, vulnerable memoir of this journey for you?
Yeah, it didn't start as an exploration of my own grief or a response necessarily to what was happening to my mother. I think it started, one, because I had been trying to write a different novel for 5 years, and it was much more sort of literary. Definitely, it was a campus novel about a grad student and a teaching assistant who fall in love while they're trying to find the secret to time travel. And it was sort of very heavily indebted to Donna Tartt's The Secret History. And, you know, it was sort of just like your standard. I was like, oh, I hope this gets excerpted in the Paris Review, like that kind of thing. But I couldn't finish it, and it was getting further and further away from me, and I was kind of drowning in it. And being a novelist was the only thing I had ever wanted, and I wanted it so bad. And that book, I just was running myself into a wall, and I felt like that was slowly killing me. And then as that was happening, my mother was diagnosed, and suddenly I couldn't think about anything else. I couldn't write anymore. And I couldn't find any resources for what happens if your mom is suddenly hallucinating, and it's not, you know, and she's in her 50s, and it's not dementia, it's schizophrenia, which usually starts in your 20s. And there was just no, you know, I would talk to therapists, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Everyone was kind of just like, oh, this doesn't happen. But it was happening. You know, I was watching it happen, and I felt like my family wasn't really taking it seriously. So I was like, well, I'm going to write about this, one, to better understand it. And then down the line, I was like, well, if this ever happens to anyone else, I want this book to exist so that they know that they're not alone, that there is a conversation already started around this, that this does happen. And it's so unbelievable when it's happening in front of you. You want to turn away, you know? And so I kind of felt a duty to not do that. It was more out of that sort of sense of wanting to help other people and just provide a resource that I couldn't find for myself.
Yeah. And I guess as a follow-up to that, has your family read or members of your family read the book? And what has the reaction been?
So like throughout the book, my grandmother, who is this incredible woman, she came from a small town in East Texas. Her mother's great grandparents were slaves and had been sharecroppers, and kind of came up from Nacogdoches to Marshall, these smaller little towns, made it to Houston, made it to the big city. My grandmother became a successful entrepreneur. So she had built this wonderful life for herself in the historic Black neighborhood of Third Ward in Houston, as Andy brought up in his introduction. And so she had sort of worked so hard to build this life for herself against such impossible odds that she had kind of had to build this wall of denial around herself, not just around mental illness, but also things like racism, the fact that she was a college student at UT kind of right after segregation ended, when people were still openly racist in Austin. Her own husband, my grandfather, was abusive to the point where he put her in the hospital, and she had to escape, she had to flee his house. And he also obviously had some kind of mental illness. Her mother was bedridden with depression. So she had kind of surmounted all of these odds. And I think the flip side of that was that she was so deeply not in touch with her emotions and not able to see it. It's in the book. I think we have a conversation where we're talking about my mother, and she's like, well, you know, when Black people have mental health crises, we just fake it till we make it. You know, you don't go see a therapist, you don't talk about it, you just fake it till you make it. And meanwhile, my mom is basically talking to herself on the street outside of the car where I'm talking to my grandmother, and she looks very much like any other unhoused person that you would see in LA, you know, under a highway. And but for this was my mother, you know, and I think it all came to me that, like, I don't know, just like opened up a lot for me. And I think what my grandmother's response to the book now is, she's not able to read it. She won't read it. She's very proud of me. She talks about it to all her friends. All of her friends came to my readings in Houston, and she shares on Facebook all the articles and the reviews, but she won't read it because she doesn't want to be sad. She just doesn't want to be sad. And I get that. It's that same moment of not wanting to look at my mother, and the way people turn away from people suffering and in deep need every day, all the time. If you live in a city like Los Angeles, you do it every time you drive down the street. And I suddenly wasn't able to do that anymore. But for my grandmother, I think it's kind of it's like a survival tactic. She can't feel things too deeply. She has too much to lose. You know, so she's probably my closest family member who, you know, I sent the book to her, to my aunt, to anyone, and anyone who I thought deserved the respect of being able to read it before it was published, and she chose not to read it. But yeah.
Well, that's beautiful that she's proud of you and shares with all her friends, and also it makes sense, like, you know, that's been her coping mechanism on how she's gotten through all this hard times, right? And yeah, so wow, it's a beautiful mix, complicated like everything is. You also bring up that there's this like underwriting current of like fear in the book around, you know, being afraid that you might end up like your mother. It seems to influence a lot of things, of like examining your own behavior, constantly worried if like these connections you're seeing, if that's like a start of your unraveling, or, you know, maybe you don't want to have, you're not sure if you want to have kids for this reason, you know, you struggle with Ethan, your partner, for this, around some of these things. And so I guess I'm wanting to know, like, what are the big ways you see fear showing up in your life, or how do you relate to it now?
Yeah, it's the same sort of relationship we were talking about between rage and grief. I think fear is probably also part of that. I am very quick to anger in the same way that my mother was. And sometimes when I get angry, it's like lighting a fuse, and then I just get angrier and angrier and I can't control it. But I am very lucky to be married to somebody who is really good at dealing with that, at sort of addressing it in a way that is both kind of respectful of both of us. My husband's parents are both academic psychologists, so he grew up as like a case study in how to raise good children. Like has all the. So I'm very lucky in that, and he's just a really kind person. So, you know, when I find myself just like kind of flipping out, I get that space and that grace to calm down before too much damage is wrought, and I'm able to, yeah, just sort of analyze the situation and not have a knee-jerk reaction. So I would say, like, just, yeah, loving someone like that and being loved by them, you know, my friend, trying really hard not to isolate. I think that is something that can be very risky.
Yeah.
Definitely isolated ourselves. Yeah, trying to make sure that like I'm giving back to the community. You know, like I do a lot of volunteer work. I try to show up for my friends. It's like self-care, but in the sense of taking care of other people and how that reflects back, that helps keep you. Yeah, I try to be part of the world.
Yeah, I feel like action and like that connection back to the world and giving to that world is part of self-care. It can be, sure. Yeah. Wow, thanks for sharing all of that. And also that like that resource in it, like that is a resource of like, oh, okay, this is some of the way that I keep connecting back to the world. Because that's another theme in your book, is like this idea of like, you know, am I using my writing sort of as a way of separating from the world a little bit, of like analyzing it, but not having to be in it and not having to feel. And so that idea of like giving back and being connected, you're like connecting yourself. That's like a way of continuing to like get in there, get deeper, right? Like make sure you're still connected to it. You're not separating.
Yeah. And I guess that's part of writing a book too. I mean, one of the big differences between the novel that I was trying to write and this book is like that novel, I was like, every sentence has to be perfect. I have to show everybody what an expert writer I am. I have this fancy MFA from NYU. I studied creative writing at Brown. Like I want to win prizes. And, you know, I want the famous novelists to look upon me and anoint me. And then with this book, I was like, no, I just want to have a conversation. I'm just going to write down my thoughts and shape them. Obviously, there was a lot of revision. I rewrote this book for years, but it's much more straightforward. And it's just like, here's what happened to me. Maybe it'll help you with what's happening to you. And maybe we can talk about it. It's more like I'm in a relationship with the reader. I'm not trying to say I am a writer. You know, even now, like I'm not cured. I'm not an authority on anything. I'm not, you know, I just had an experience that maybe would be people who have similar experiences.
Yeah, so much. And there's so many layers I'm seeing in the chat too. I mean, definitely the epigenetic trauma, all of it, from the history, from what you're talking about with your grandmothers and a grandmother and, well, grandmothers, I'm going to say, and mother and aunts and all of that, right? And how your experience too, and you describe at your prep school and at Brown and all of that. Yeah, there's so many layers to all of that. So just really, really naming those and centering those as well. But there's so much power in sharing this and in starting that conversation, because the conversation you're starting, I mean, so many people are experiencing familial mental illness. So many people are experiencing the effect of that, you know, epigenetic trauma, right? So that it's just so important to have these conversations out there, and that people are like, oh, we can talk about this. Like, okay, what else is here that I want to talk about or hear or contribute or like learn, or, you know, like how do we do this, right? How are we humaning together? That's the big question of life, right? So thank you for really bringing this piece forward for all of us with your story. You say, I mean, you just said you're not healed or you're an expert or anything like that, and that, like, totally relate to that with my own journeys. And I think we're all of us, very few of us are healed or experts. And if we are, there's usually more because we're human. And there was this beautiful moment in the book that feels like a moment of change. And And I'm curious, like we all get stuck in our patterns and our coping mechanisms, as we talked about, and are reacting to the situations in like the same less optimal ways over and over again. And it's hard to see a lot of those patterns sometimes and be able to unpack and examine them. And in this passage of the book, I feel like it really speaks to like moments we can have where we maybe get enough space for a second to be able to see some of those things. So I'm wondering if you could share one of the scenes on like page 156 to 158. It's a scene where your dog Larry Bird has just been attacked at the park by another dog, and you've taken her home with your partner Ethan.
Okay. So what's really interesting about this part is that I am actually in the place where this scene takes place right now.
Oh, wow.
I got displaced because of the fires in LA, and our friends who own this ranch were like, we have this Airbnb space, just come up and we'll give you a good rate for a month. I don't even know if they're going to charge us, which is amazing. So we're back here, but this is where we got married. We come up here all the time just to see our friends, but now we're here because of the fires. The space is called Vinyl Vineyards, if anyone's looking for like a glamping experience. It's absolutely beautiful. There's gorgeous trailers. If you want to come to Paso Robles, just a shameless plug for my friend's business.
We'll take it.
Okay, so in this passage, my dog has just gotten into a fight with my friend's dog, and she's been bitten on the ear. So I lie with Larry Bird, my dog's name is Larry Bird, against my chest in the guest room, feeling her small body tremble, Ethan beside us. The bleeding stops as quickly as it started. She falls asleep, but I'm still crying. Holding her, I repeat for Ethan all the things Sadie wrote, taking pleasure in knowing the email by heart. So for a little bit of context, Ethan's my husband. Sadie is a former friend who very recently, just sort of out of nowhere, decided to end our friendship after she had achieved a lot of artistic success and is sort of maybe dealing with the repercussions and the trauma of suddenly becoming very famous. So she's written me an email basically telling me everything that's wrong with me, on top of the fact that I've just received my mom's diagnosis, and the novel I've been working on for 5 years has fallen apart. Holding her, I repeat for Ethan all the things Sadie wrote, taking pleasure in knowing the email by heart. What I think I want, I tell my husband, my boyfriend, is for everyone who has ever hurt me to fall in line and explain to me explicitly what I did to deserve it. But they aren't here. The only person here is Ethan, and he is growing tired. What Sadie did is not about you. It's about her. She's probably feeling vulnerable. It's psychologically dangerous to go from being normal to famous so fast. And she's taking it out on you. She might not even know it. You always think other people know so much more than you, but they don't. People grow, and sometimes in the process, they fuck up. You're the collateral damage here. No, I say, I mean it. I want you to tell me what's wrong with me. Be honest. Say it straight to my face. Well, his brow furrows. Nobody ever knows what you're thinking because you won't say. People assume you're quietly judging them. No one likes that. You feel sorry for yourself a lot. You don't always consider other people's feelings. And I mean, when was the last time you apologized to anyone? You expect people to give you a pass, but you're so quick to cut people out when they piss you off. You think all these crazy things are wrong with you, but you won't look your actual faults in the face. He pauses. You're self-involved. You're not very interested in other people, except in ways that directly pertain to you or your writing. Sure, I say softly. All of this sounds right. It is exactly who I am, but none of it is anything I ever plan to change. You don't stick around to have the fight, he says. There's something in your ego that won't allow you to hear what you don't want to hear. You just disappear inside your own head. I nod and stare out the window into Ted and Diana's vast yard. What if we said fuck it and ran away somewhere, I say. What if we bought a house out here? That's exactly what I'm talking about, Ethan says. We can't afford a house. What would that even fix? I don't know, I say, but I do. I'm trying to get away from Ethan's words, from my book, from my agent, from Sadie, from my belief that I drove my mother mad and that I drove Sadie away and that I will do the same thing to Ethan. From the depression, I'm always trying to give the slip. But then I remember the way my mother always told me how she wanted to run away from Houston to Atlanta, where she would start a business, Newark, where she would be a flight attendant, Berkeley, where I would go to college, West Africa, where she would find out which country we're really from. We were always going to go somewhere, and it was always going to fix all her problems, but we never left, and nothing ever got fixed. How did I fall so smoothly into the channels carved out for me? All I've done is resist. The resistance led me here. Are you spacing out again? Ethan says. You do anything to avoid reality. Work on your novel. Finish it. Move on. You can do it. I believe in you.
Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. Wow, there's a lot in that. I'm curious, did that feel like a significant moment of recognition for you at the time, or the way it sort of does in the book, or is that just another moment for you?
It's a good question, because that was kind of a conversation we had a lot and still have a lot. It's more of a pattern of just, I tend to spin out. Well, Justin is very centered and calm and grounded. So I'm always like, and he's just like, no, just focus, like put one foot in front of the other. And that was just sort of emblematic of our relationship. But I do think in the past, when I was reading it, like when I was reading that part for the audiobook, I remember thinking like, yeah, I was just reliving my mom's patterns, but the reason I could break out of them is because I had somebody helping me. You know, I think I was looking at my old notes from when I was writing this, and there was a part that I cut when it's just a conversation, and I was complaining about how I couldn't finish the book, like I was always complaining about how I couldn't finish the novel. And Justin was like, you think there's a ceiling of like how much you can achieve and how high you can go, but I'm trying to explain to you that a ceiling is just in your head. Like, it was basically, he was like, I'm going to try to pull you up through this ceiling. And I think if I hadn't had somebody really trying to do that, I wouldn't have written this book for sure. I wouldn't have been able to.
Wow. Wow, that's so powerful. And yeah, something I've seen in healing and in grief and in pain, that like we need each other so badly. And we can't really do this alone. We need it to be communal. And in this case, you have such a powerful partner that has helped you with that. Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. There's also like one scene in the book where you're really upset about a review for something, and then he writes a review overnight when you don't notice. So like critiquing the critiques and you make him take it down because you know it's him. But it's so beautiful. Like it's such like to have someone like that in your corner is just so sweet. Yeah. Wow.
And one thing I want to say about that too is that like he's not, I guess what I wanted really to do in this fucking, which felt kind of risky and dangerous, is like, he's not an unflawed person, you know, like he's unflawed. I was like, if I can just be as honest as possible about our relationship, like in all of the nuances and all of the ways that, you know, we both get on each other's nerves, and that but still like, he's so human and like just loving and just selfless in certain ways. I don't know. I just thought maybe that would be useful, because I think sometimes there's a lack of nuance and what makes the stories about what makes a good person, you know, and when in reality, all of us are good and bad and sort of deeply flawed and also trying our best. And I was kind of like, oh, am I risking? And I know, you know, that I did, like losing the reader's empathy here, or I don't know, sort of creating kind of a rupture between the story and the reader. But I don't know, it was important to me to show him and me really honestly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, I wasn't trying to say that he was some savior or something in the previous comment, but it's really important what you did. And it's very brave, because like you said, you might be risking losing the reader's empathy for you or for you and Ethan, and for you to be like, that's not what the point is. The point is to have this conversation, right? The point is to have other people be able to see themselves in me and him and others and my mother and all of that, right? So like, yeah, it's a really brave thing you did in that. And I think it's what we need. It's what this world needs, is to have those real brave moments and real brave conversations. So thank you so much for speaking to that right now, and like just like really showing exactly what you were doing and why this conversation in this book is so powerful. So yeah, thanks so much. I wanted to ask a little bit about the writing itself. So throughout the book, you show like a complicated relationship with your writing. So I think I referenced this a little bit earlier, but you said things like, you know, you're tired of cannibalizing moments from your life for art. And you also ponder, like I said before, of whether or not you're creating these stories a little bit to try to separate yourself from the world a little bit, or from life even. But as we've spoken about in this time, like the telling of this story, of this memoir, is very different. And so I'm curious, has there been, through writing this book, like an evolution in your relationship to your writing? And have there been any unexpected outcomes of writing this memoir in terms of your own well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was so writing is so lonely, and I was sort of so in my own head about, oh my gosh, what happens when this book comes out? Is everyone going to be mad at me? You just like come up with a million different scenarios. I get it wrong, like, you know, are people going to come out of their woodwork and yell at me? I think I felt like very, very vulnerable, and what has come out of it has been these amazing conversations that I get to have with people, and just incredible, like meeting incredible people, and the kind of the opposite of that loneliness. And that's, after locking myself in a room for years and years and years to write a book, it's kind of like a really nice, totally unexpected reward. So it's been, I think now, you know, it's weird, you come out on the other side of a project like this that was your whole life for so long, and no matter what happens, you're kind of like, okay, well, what next? It's like, you celebrate and it's wonderful, but then it's like, well, what fills that space? And I've been trying now to approach that question with curiosity, as opposed to anxiety. You know, there's obviously some anxiety. I write TV for a living, and I'm like, well, it's totally changed my relationship to just what I'm willing to write, what I'm interested in writing about, what I feel like I'm good at writing about. And sometimes with TV, you kind of just have to write what you need to write for money, and that is much, much harder for me now. Now that I know.
Talked about truth. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your truth with us today, and your book, and just starting this conversation. I just find that the way that you phrase that so powerful. So thank you for starting this conversation and being in conversation with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was lovely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm going to pass it back to Andy now for the honor ceremony, but thank you again. Andy, you're muted.
Thank you. I was just saying, Sarah, we'll see you soon for the very ending of the vigil. Thanks again, Amanda, Sarah, what a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much. We are now going to move into the honor ceremony with Jane Rigler. It's my pleasure to introduce her to you. I met Jane Rigler at New York University last fall. We were at a gathering during the United Nations General Assembly. It was all about celebrating innovative approaches to global health and well-being, and doing that through the arts. This, by the way, was a convening organized by the World Health Organization. I'm not sure this convening is going to be happening next year with the way things are going, but I hope so. Jane is a musician interested in multisensorial listening, and she's a new Reimagine collaborator. She studied flute performance at Northwestern University and developed her work in experimental music at UCSD. Her compositions explore movement, languages, and ancestral songs. She is a certified deep listening facilitator, and we'll learn more about that from Jane. She taught at University of Colorado for 14 years. She currently collaborates with neuroscientists and therapists to develop restorative and nervous system regulation techniques using sound and composing. She now lives in the Hudson Valley of New York. She will lead us in this honor ceremony and give us a taste of deep listening. Jane, thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. It really is an honor to be here. And I'm just so happy to be part of this and to listen to Sarah and Amanda and Andy and all of you, really. So thank you so much. So I have a few minutes here to just talk a little bit about what I do in my relationship to sound. And I'll be naming a few people as I talk, and these are the people that I'm honoring tonight. So I just wanted to mention a little bit about how listening to sound and collective sound making has personally helped me in many ways during moments of grief and mourning, as well as during challenging health experiences. When I was undergoing major life-altering surgery a few years ago, I found myself in the ICU and, barely sleeping and in pain and often alone. And my mother had died just 8 months before, so I was really missing her and her support, comfort, and positivity. And, being in that sterile, uncomfortable environment with all the bleeps and sounds of the machines and people in other rooms, I found myself humming to myself. And I was trying to make it a lullaby, but that ended up being very difficult to do. Humming can require a certain effort that, I felt very challenging at the time to do, but I would place my hands, somewhere where it was comfortable on my body, and I would just hum a long note on an exhale without concerning myself as to the pitch or the quality of the sound. And so sometimes, it wouldn't really come out very smoothly, and sometimes the humming sound would just be barely audible. Sometimes it became more like an imaginary meditation, just a sound that I hear in my head. And so I thought it might be lovely to invite you to just try some humming right now with me, but in your own space. You don't need to put your mic on or anything. In fact, just keeping your video off is also fine if you want to keep that off or on, however you like. But I invite you to place your hands or a hand just close to your chest or your neck if possible, or even on your belly, wherever it feels supportive. And we're going to do this 3 times. And while we're doing this, I just want to invite you to notice any vibrations in your body or whatever just feels good. So in your own time, just taking a deep breath in and then slowly humming at a comfortable pitch, a long sound that is the length of your outgoing breath. And we'll do this 3 times. So I'll start. So if you're still doing it, just keep on doing it if you'd like. And so along these lines, I want to invite you to participate in a score that is part of a collection of scores by the late composer Pauline Oliveros. And she called these collections of text scores written in prose sonic meditations. And they are sonic because somehow there is sound involved in these directives or guided invitations. And meditative only in the sense that these scores, they just invite you to be contemplative, reflective, calm, focused, and have an attention or an awareness of what you're doing and where you are in this very moment. And so this one that I invite you to do is called the Imaginary Meditation. There's 5 questions, and all you have to do is just listen and be present and imagine if you so choose. So to get you ready for this imaginary meditation, just at this moment, I invite you to notice your body and the weight of it and the positioning and maybe the shape of it in your chair or your cushion, the support right now that is being offered to you physically, the support of the object that's holding you, the support of the building, place, land that's holding you, and the support of any other person, place, being, spirit that is holding you, and your breathing. And you can close your eyes if you wish. Imaginary meditation. Can you imagine your own resonance? Can you imagine listening beyond the edge of your own imagination? Can you imagine that every cell in your body is vibrating all the time? Can you imagine the tuning of the universe? Can you imagine the echoes of all the footsteps you have ever taken? And now, I'd like to bring you back here, if you weren't. Welcome back. And now we'll take a few moments. Yeah, they're so beautiful. Yeah, I invite any comments about what you experienced or what you're feeling. But now I'd like to invite you, we'll take about 4 minutes or so. I'd like to invite you to enter the names of loved ones in the chat, as well as anything you want to remember or share or honor about them. Sorry, my cat is. Yeah, so just, and I invite you to enter the names of loved ones in the chat. And while you're writing down whatever you want to say or share, honor about them, I'll be playing some sounds. I'll be using primarily my bass flute, but I might be using some other little instruments as well. Okay, here we go.
Jane, thank you so much. That was so beautiful, so healing. If folks want to continue entering names and things and thoughts in the chat, please continue to do so. I'm going to now move us into the candle extinguishing part of our program. Let's get this going. Hold on a sec. Bear with me, folks. Okay. Okay. We're going to start, let's see, with me. And then we'll go to Jane, and we'll go to Sarah. You can grab a candle, put it up against the lens on your device. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world and keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
Now, hold up your candle. We're going to count to 3 and then blow it out. And I want to remind you, your breath is a powerful thing. It's a creative thing, as Jane demonstrated. It can make you feel safe, can help you relax, and it can restore your soul. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you all. Reimagine resources, support groups, a vigil like this one are no cost or low cost. This is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those of you who already made a tax-deductible donation to Reimagine when you registered for today's program, thank you. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hard stuff into purpose and meaning. To make sure our nonprofit can continue to offer these programs, we need financial support, so thank you. My colleague Trina is also pasting in the chat a link to our survey. This is really important. We'd like to hear more from you about what worked well tonight, what can be improved, what your interests are. So please start filling out that survey link that's pasted in the chat while everything is fresh in your mind. That would be great. I want to share with you what's going on with our programs. Hold on a sec. We've got a monthly series at Reimagine on different themes. This month, our focus is on sibling loss. Surviving brothers and sisters are known as the forgotten mourners. Often in families, The grief shifts to parents and to caregivers, and siblings are often overlooked. This three-part series will touch on grief experiences across the life cycle. It's certainly intended for those who have direct experience with sibling loss, but it's equally designed for those who want to learn how to show up for a friend or a family member. Your questions are welcome about complex or estranged sibling relationships, the shifting of family roles and identity when we survive our siblings, the different experiences of anticipated and sudden loss, and the experiences of those who have undergone stigmatized loss due to suicide, overdose, and incarceration. Our guest speakers are storytellers, authors, artists, podcasters, and grief educators. They will provide practical tools and support for coping with sibling loss, and will also explore the potential for growth and transformation in the aftermath of a sibling's death through legacy projects. I want to give out a shout out to our community of Reimagine collaborators like Jane Rigler. These folks host events, experiences, workshops on our platform. So please check out these as well. We often encourage our collaborators to host programs related to that monthly theme. So please check out on February 13th, we've got Karen Karras and Kimberly Woodland of Body Comes to Mind. And on February 21st, Danny Sather hosts a workshop on best practices for adults to support children who are grappling with death, loss, and grief. On February 20th, we have Room for Grief. Every third Thursday of the month, Reimagine welcomes everyone to Room for Grief. Whether you want to learn about it or you're seeking support in your grief journey, Room for Grief is a peer-led drop-in group. We leverage art, creativity, and prompts to foster conversation and pathways for those seeking to process and navigate all the feels. Grief support specialist and end-of-life doula Michelle Thornhill will be our facilitator. We have other collaborator events this month. On February 5th, we've got Rediscovering You After Loss, and you all had a wonderful taste of Jane Rigler's work as a musician and a facilitator. Come back for more on February 20th, where you can experience some more deep sounding. Let's see. Yeah, we've got more events on our schedule at letsreimagine.org, so please check that out. And finally, come back next month on March 5th to the next virtual Candlelight Vigil with Mary Frances O'Connor and Stephanie Sarrazin. And I think that is it. Yes. So I'm going to stop our share. Once again, I want to thank my Reimagine colleagues, Amanda Nagai, Derek Hosberg, Trina Williams. I want to thank our very special guests, Sarah LaBrie, and Jane Rigler. And I'm just looking at the chat now because I didn't get a chance to see all the wonderful things that you guys shared. Thank you. Now is the time when we unmute and we say the word love. And I hope you'll all join us for that. Dara, are we good with the unmuting? If folks can unmute?
I'm doing it right now.
Fantastic. Okay, on the count of three, we're all gonna say love together. It's gonna sound beautiful no matter what. So 1, 2, 3. Love.
More. Listen to the dog.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Peace and love.
Bye.